Okay, so once again, we welcome back to our session. This time we should be listening to panel plenary, and the topic is about ethical frameworks on service learning and community engagement. Now we have 4 different researchers and 1 moderator. They'll be sharing their experiences, their own context. Each speaker, I'll be calling them, but after the last speaker, we shall be having our Q&A, and they'll be sitting down here. Our first speaker is from Beijing Normal Hong Kong Baptist University. She will be talking about the ethics of emotional labor and service learning, boundaries, dilemmas, and framework construction. So friends, please help me welcome, just a round of applause please, to Lei Wei. Okay, thank you. I'll be calling them one by one, and our second presenter will talk about Dagyao Dunong as an indigenous ethical frame for service learning and community engagement in the Philippines. This will be given by Mark Anthony Abiner from Ateneo de Manila. Okay, thank you. And another presentation is about an indigenous informed code of practice for civically engaged service learning. This will be presented by Dr. Rika Swanson. Okay, she is from the Independent Institute of Emirates Waterfall in South Africa. And we have our last presenter. It will be done online from the University of the Philippines, Manila, Ms. Josephine Therese Emily Teves, co-authored by Sarah Grace Candelario. Friends, let's start our plenary. Please help me welcome Lai Weng.
Okay, good morning everyone. My name is Lai Wei, and thank you for this opportunity to present my research here today. My presentation entitled please my PPT, yeah. My presentation entitled Ethics of Emotional Labor in Service Learning, the Boundaries, Dilemmas, and Framework Construction is based on a case study. Okay, and I will cover it. Okay, I will cover 6 sections in the presentation. Okay, let's come to the first one: background and research questions. This study grows out of a course I teach at BMBU, a service learning course where students take on voluntary service as part of their curriculum. One embedded project called the floating desk. Through this project, students accompany the professional social workers social workers on home visiting to the families who are applying for the schooling financial aid. Okay, their role is distinctive, so they are not the tutors or traditional volunteers in this project. They serve as documenters and video or photographers, collecting informations, photographing their living conditions, and participating in eligible assessments. In other words, the students must be objective information collectors and the emotional witness at the same time. The project runs on a semester rotation. So we run this project for several years, but this is the first time we bridge the practical and research gap, trying to tell the story. Also, okay, and each student completes 1 or 2 visits a semester. So the short term, the high intensity structure is representative of many course embedded service learning programs. And it's precisely where the emotional and ethical demands become more concentrated. And despite this, 16 scholars has largely missed the ethical dimension of when students go through Emotional labor research has stated in commercial settings, so it's all about the organization and commercial. Social learning, at the same time, the social learning theory treats emotion as a trigger, the starting point for reflection, not something that persists and shapes the learning process. So this is the photo we take during the home visits. So against this background, 4 research questions have been raised. These questions move from the descriptions to impact to diagnosed and to construction. Okay, let's come to the first capture. Okay, and this figure maps our theoretical landscape. On the left, the emotional labor, we can see emotional labor stream from Hochschild's commercial framework through to Grandy, all focus on organization, as I just mentioned, or overlooking education. So in the middle stream, the way Cope, Felton notice that they notice emotion as catalyst only. So across both traditions, the ethical dimension student emotional experience has been systematically neglected. The 2 supplementive perspectives on the right, critical emotion studies, boundary theory. These 2 theories helps us see 3 research gaps which we highlighted in red at the right. Okay. And based on those gaps, we propose the concept of emotional labor in service learning. The table compares our concept with the Plenary frameworks. The key distinctions are the highlighted column on the right. Yeah. Students' motivation is a triple structure. Their role is that of documentary and witness, and the power dynamic is triangular. Okay, we used constructivist granted theory. 14 volunteer students, participants joined this research, completing 1 or 2 home visits each in the semesters. Data came from these 14 in-depth interviews, 28 reflective journals, and the 7 participant observations. Then 3-stage coding produced 327 reference points and 4 code themes. So the theoretical situation was confronted from the interview 11 onward. At this point, I want to mention that on the positionality, I was both the course instructor and the researcher. So to reduce the power effects, interviews were conducted by my research assistant, and participants were assured their response has no bearing on their grades. Okay, let's come to our the research findings. This figure shows the distribution of 327 reference points across the core 4 themes. The last number here I'd like to mention is the meaning crisis is the smallest one in the frequency, but it appears across more than 2/3 of participants. There is 11 participants mentioned it. Frequency does not equal importance, and critically, these 4 themes are not parallel. They formed a development trajectory shown in the next figure. So, next page. The previous one, yeah, here. And this figure, let's walk with me from the bottom to the top. At the foundation, the ethical boundaries in blue, we found that the students develop distance awareness and self-regulations. When those boundaries are tested, they enter to the second phrase, that is the practical dilemmas. One student described completing required photographing tasks that feel intrusive because she knew it was the pathway to obtain the financial aid for that family she visited. When dilemmas cannot be resolved through the boundary setting alone, some students reach meaning crisis, the red layer at the top. A fundamental questioning of whether helping is illegitimate at all. One student asked, am I using their difficulties to satisfy my own needs or my own feeling to have done the service? Yeah, and support mechanism on the right operates across all three layers. Okay, so this page are the this page presents representative voices from each theme. That's what the students said in the reflective journal and the interviews. Okay. The students valued the pre-visit orientation, on-site supervision, and peer support, but they identified 5 structural gaps on the right. These gaps are not random. They reflect a systematic failure to recognize emotional labor as an ethical issue requiring the institution response, not just individual coping. Okay, then to address those gaps, we proposed the ethical framework that we may follow or we may use to in the future course design. The framework has 2 components. The first, answer when to intervene. The 4 temperate dimensions in this figure. Okay, so let's move through these 4 phrases. The first one is pre-service preparation. Students lack vocabulary to name their experience. And when students can identify surface acting or early compaction fatigue signals, they move from inarticulate discomfort to addressable issues. This phrase is also build structural awareness of poverty, systematic rules, so that what students encounter is recognized, not paralyzing. And phrase 2, the process support. The key invention is formally separate emotional debriefing from the academic evaluation. Formal task refusal mechanism also lives here. And the phrase 3, I think, is the most important phrase in this framework. The meaning reconstruction. The educator's role is not to resolve students' certain questions, but to provide scaffolding, guiding them from what did they feel to why, who interested in our service, what power is at play. So this is where the distinction between empathy and compassion matters. Compassion involves not just feeling with another, but judgment about injustice. And the last one is phrase 4, post-service integration. Feedback loops so students can learn what happened to the family after their visit. The alumni network to sustain commitment beyond the course. Okay, the second component answers what tensions require attention. The 5 boundary types in this figure, there are continual to be negative, not problems to be solved. Each has an optimal zoom. So I'm not going to name it one by one. Then we can come to the next figure, that we combine these two, integrate these two components. Each self represents a specific inventions at the intersection of a phrase and a boundary type. 3 cells are highlighted. You can see 3 cells are highlighted as priorities. The role clarification in pre-service, the fatigue monitoring during service, and critical reflection during meaning reconstruction. The feedback loops operate across all boundary types in the final phrase. The bottom line of the diagram says it precisely dimension answer when and the boundaries answer what. Okay, this figure shows our 2 theoretical contributions. On the left, the principle of moderate emotional engagement. The inverted U curve shows that beyond the optimal zoom, emotional investment produces diminishing returns, exhaustion, and meaning crisis setting. This challenge the Mitchell's deep assumption, the belief that more intensive engagement always produce better outcome. Our data shows significant burden arising in just 1 or 2 visits. On the right, 3 conceptual shifts from meaning orientation service learning. These components Mitchell's critical service learning by addressing the emotional and existential dimensions he lived under theorized. So the framework maps onto practice at 3 levels. For education, for educators, pre-service preparation with conceptual vocabulary and boundary training. In service debriefing, formally separate from graded evaluation, reflective activities that move from what happened to why and for whom, and the post-service feedback loops. For institutions, the most novel recommendation is a formal task refusal mechanism. Procedures allow students to decline ethically problematic tasks without academic penalty. This does not exist right now, at least at my college. It is a structural invention, not an individual coping strategy. For students, collaborate engagement is also genuine participate. Recognizing your emotional limits, treating meaning crisis as a starting point for critical thinking rather than evidence of failure. Those forms are ethical practice. Okay, then let me close my presentation with these 4 points. The deep engagement is not the only value from the service learning participation. Collaborated, meaning anchored, emotional involvement, the psychologically resources, structurally supported, and critical reflective are all also union service and union learning. So we do not ask students to feel less. We ask the institutions to support them better, and educators to provide the framework that makes sense of what they feel. Okay, that's all my presentation. Thank you.
Lauscher. Okay, now we shall listen to the Philippine experience. Round of applause, please, to Dr. Mark Anthony Abiner from Ateneo de Manila University.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. So for today, I'm going to present a theoretical paper going back to the roots of how we perceive service learning as a Filipino, consulting the works of Dr. Vigilio Enriquez of Psikolohiyang Pilipino, Pantayong Pananaw in History of Dr. Zeus Salazar, Filipinohiya of Dr. Prospero Quevar, and The Filipino Mind, Filipino Philosophy by Father Leonardo Mercado. So, looking at these constructs, my presentation today will have 3 layers. The first one is we're going to discuss about the global discourse of service learning. Second part is service learning in the context of the Philippines and its inadequacies, leading to a decolonized perspective of what service learning could be and what could it be called here in our country. So as you would see in the title of the presentation, you already see the proposed word or the proposed term, and that would be Dagyaw Duno. Okay, so in the global discourse, when we look at the definition of service learning, there's always these 3 elements. So we have, of course, the element of serving communities, the element of academic learning, and the ability to bridge that is through reflection. So those are the standard definitions. But of course, if you read through the scholarship of service learning, there has been an argument from traditional going to the critical form of service learning. The traditional form of service learning is seen as students as helpers, universities as providers of expertise, and communities as passive recipients. Now, there is a romantic allure when we talk about service, right? For example, mostly in what we do in life, service means a sacrifice of your time, your generosity, and at the same time, there is a sense of social responsibility. But of course, service is a double-edged sword. There is also a form of hierarchy. The one serving and those who are served. And that creates a kind of hierarchy in which communities are often seen as passive recipients of such service. Okay. So from there, it matters because service learning in its evolution has moved away from the charity model towards a critical model of service learning through the works of Mitchell. And if you read into the many publications under the IARSLCE and the Michigan Journal, which I also love reading, there is an emphasis. There are different principles of service learning, but this too is the balancing act. We have the concept of reciprocity, a very vital, important element of service learning, where there must be a sense of mutual gains or mutual benefit, in which when we work together, there is a sense of partnership. In terms of agency, negotiating expectations, shared responsibility, and judging the value of the work. And on the other side, the important element of service learning is reflection. But it is not just any type of reflection because, as you would see here, a normal reflection is what did you learn from the experience. But many critical scholars would look at critical reflection, going deeper in terms of power, privilege, social status, and institutional responsibility, and equal relationships when we go to communities. The power relations between students, faculty members, and community partners. So that is important. And there is a shift, a shift from service learning dominated by charity frameworks, good intentions are not enough, and short-term assistance, to really seeing communities as partners, having meaningful role, and respond to the conditions behind the problem. And that discourse of service learning is very important in the Philippines. In the Philippines, when you look at the service learning literature, in every aspect of it, we talk about poverty, displacement, weak public services, and structural inequalities. These are the everyday things that we live by. So it was obvious when Dr. Grace Ngay asked about us a while ago, which is the most important stakeholder in service learning. And typical in the Philippines, he would answer communities, right? Because of the context where we belong. Okay, the challenges that we always face because of these problems. And we meet students who live in those communities, and even faculty members living in such communities. So when you look at the service learning literature in the Philippines, there are strong links with the concept of community development, social formation, civic engagement, field education, participatory research, and all anchored into the extension function of higher education. Community extension is very big in the Philippines. Once you go out, community extension is not really a discourse in other universities. But in the Philippines, it is a big thing, okay? And we use all of that to address access to education, public health, livelihoods, disaster preparedness, children and youth development, social protection, and a very vital element, which is a contribution of the martial law years, was the importance of organizing communities. Now, all of this informed how we view service learning and community engagement. So therefore, service learning is not just a technical skill that students need to acquire. When they go to the field, they ask this question: whose knowledge is recognized? Who benefits? Who prioritizes or guide the work? Who carries the burden of participation? Who has authority to interpret the results? These are not technical questions. These are very ethical questions that we confront. And one thing that we always tackle with is, of course, studies have shown that students gain from this service and experience. It is non-debatable. They gain a sense of empathy, insight, and civic awareness. But on the other side, what happens to communities? Sometimes, or most of the times, they deal with unfinished outputs, unreturned data, and recommendations that remain in the classroom. So, we need to reframe what service learning is in the context of how we view it in our culture, in our sense of history, and in our tradition. That's why it is very important, on my part, I argue, that whenever we do service learning, we need to make community agency more visible. And that is the critique whenever I go to different universities, especially when I talk to community organizers, activists. Especially, I came from the College of Social Work and Community Development, which is very critical with the term. So they always ask me, but Mark, where is the agency of communities? Service learning talks about students, universities, faculty members serving communities. But where is the community agency? And I would explain reciprocity, I would explain reflection. But sometimes they would tell me, if you need to explain a lot, then maybe that is not the term for us. Because reciprocity, reflection is not obvious in the term. Okay, so it challenged me to look at what would be the term that we usually encounter when we work with communities. We always say working with communities, right? And also, it is inherent when we look into service learning, there is always a sense of we need to have the acknowledgement that learning and knowledge also come from the communities that we work with. It is not a one-directional relationship. So I look into Filipino scholars in the 70s and 80s, and I'm happy that because of the decolonization aspect of the discourse that we're having right now, there is going back to those Filipino scholars. And I looked at these two terms, no, Dagyao and Dunong. And what do they mean? No? It's not just a simple translation of service learning to local Filipino terms, but what theoretical weight do they carry? So from there, when we look at the etymology, no, Dagyao is a Hiligaynon term, which is akin to bayanihan. Okay? And in the UP Visayas cultural mapping of Panay and Guimaras, they looked at Dagyao as a sense of communal work, mutual assistance, and shared responsibility. So it's not simply serving, it is always working together. And Dunong, looking at how Father Leonardo Mercado defined it, is a Tagalog term which means wisdom, knowledge, and learned capacity. But it is so much more. When we talk about Dunong, we talk about situated understanding, practical judgment, ethical discernment, responsible use of knowledge. And our own concept of theorizing, we call it in Filipino as pagdadalumat. So that dash between Dagyao and Dunong is how we form our concept, using our own experience, using our own words. So therefore, Dagyao Dunong means working together, knowing and learning together. They become inseparable. When I introduced it to my colleagues in Ateneo when we did training, many of it accepted it positively. They were telling me, wow, Dagyao Dunong is telling us what we really do with communities. We work with them, and we learn from each other. So from there are 5 important relational aspects in Dagyao Dunong. No, there are a lot of Filipino terms out there. This is not exhaustive, but these terms create a sense of ethical weight and ethical relationship. Pakikipagpalagayang loob, pakikipagkapwa-tao, bayanihan, pakikiramdam, and pagbibigayan. Okay? So, pakipagpalagayang loob means when you work with people, you don't see them as hindi sila ibang tao. You are one with them. And pakikipagkapwa-tao, grounded in the concept of kapwa, in deeper sense, it means shared personhood and solidarity. Bayanihan is our collective effort of shared purpose. Pakikiramdam is such a heavy word and so hard to practice because it's sensing what is beneath the surface. And pagbibigayan, mutual giving, accommodation, and fair exchange. So what are the ethical questions revolving around these different relational Filipino concepts? So in pakikipagpalagayan loob, we ask the question, has enough trust been built when we work with communities? Do we listen? Do we observe protocols? Do we do expectation checking? Do we let communities decide in terms of if they want to decline with the engagement, delay, or redirect? In pakikipagkapwa, are community members treated as co-persons, co-educators, and knowledge holders? In bayanihan, is the work genuinely shared or is the community carrying hidden labor? In pakikiramdam, are students and faculty attentive to silence, fatigue, hesitation, discomfort, indirect refusal, or changing conditions? And in pagbibigayan, are the burdens and benefits of engagement fairly distributed? All of them are anchored in katarungan. Because we don't want Dagyao Dunong to reproduce injustices. We want it to address the root causes of why we are in communities. So to end, let me end with this message. Dagyao Dunong is all about working together, learning together, and remaining accountable together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. This is experience from the Philippines, and now we shall be hearing experiences from from South Africa. A round of applause, please, to Dr. Rika Swanson.
Thanks so much. Okay, so the first point, just to start off with why I picked this topic, is if we specifically zoom in on the word participatory and indigenously informed, the reason why it's important is if we don't do that, we create a risk if we impose our own notions. So sometimes we don't say to ourselves what the risk is, and very important is we become irrelevant to the community, creating feelings of powerlessness that can be with the students or community. And most importantly, we channel local activism away from important challenges. So what I'll be taking you through is the problem statement, the exploration of the characteristics and principles, and the use of indigenous knowledge systems. It sounds like a lot, but this is what will be in a paper, so I will just shortly touch on it. There will be a paper either way on this. And just talking about a code of ethics, how do you get closer to that? And I want to show you an example of one of our most indigenous populations in South Africa that created, a few years ago, they created their own code of ethics, and they insist on all researchers using it. Okay, and then I am proposing, you will hear at the end, I'm actually asking a question about what prevents us from proposing a code of practice for critical service learning or community engagement in general. So the problem statement then is that it seems a no-brainer. Everyone knows you will not start a research project without getting ethical clearance. That happened through a process, which I'll show you a little bit on. Most of you will probably know how it came to be, but hardly ever will you be allowed to continue with research without getting your ethical clearance. So how did we get there, and why is it that people can start projects? Service learning is a bit more protected because it needs to go through a curriculum accreditation process, but you've heard up to now that this community voice is not necessarily embedded. Like, nobody is checking, it's not part of the approval process, and that is where the core of my question comes. Okay, so this is from one of the expert people that we default to in South Africa for community development. You've heard from the previous speaker that a lot of our work and our theories come from community development. In South Africa, we actually have 3 recognized social service professions. It's social work, child and youth care, and now we have community development practitioners as well. So they do specialize in this area. And I just want you to roll your eyes around. Like I said, it will be unpacked in a paper. But you will see the words that are important is that it needs to contribute developmentally and transformatively, fosters the cultivation of humanity. Ubuntu, you probably heard about it by now. It's very local to South Africa, meaning that I am because you are, and it's about the interdependency of people. And then the ecosystems part of it. If you understand community development, you'll understand why that's important. They also ask, transcend the silo in terms of disciplines, that we cannot solve society's problem with one discipline only. They talk about the knowledge, the democratization, that it needs to be co-created knowledge, and especially indigenous knowledge plays a huge role here, if allowed to. And then there's an emphasis on relationship building. You've heard words like trust. I think we keep on hearing it, but what happens? What do you need to do for universities, student, teachers, to actually build such trust? What does that mean? What would it look like? And then they speak about the effect that it would have on students. So that was the characteristics that for us, that was the best I could find in terms of capturing the characteristics. Then the principles, there's 3 sources here. Do not be very concerned if you can't read through all of them, but you'll see certain themes get repeated, like they'll say things like know the community, but even go to the community. And it would be that picking up on the different experiences and mobilize community assets, protecting their own agency in terms of how do you make them self-determined as part of the process for the community. And there at the bottom you'll see again, determining trustworthiness. So there's quite a few words there that's important. So if we switch to this, we've already heard so many examples already of, even now the previous speakers literally used your own language to create a model that makes sense to the people that speaks that language. So I'm not going to go much into that, but if you are not letting culture infuse what you do, because of the nature of culture, it shapes the ideas they have about partnership as well. So you'll be missing an important role. Important context for your work. So Indigenous knowledge systems, I don't know how many of you know about this. So again, there will be much more in the paper. There's even this university that I'm using there, even have 4 steps of Indigenous knowledge identification, but just a reminder that that's how the United Nations, through the World Bank, quite a few years ago, defined what Indigenous means. And interesting enough is that as much as you get more, you hear Indigenous knowledge more, but if you're not part of a country, like only recently I found out, for instance, that although Australia has a large recognition of the Indigenous people, they don't want to be referred to as Indigenous people. So they want to be, although they want to be referred to, as the Torres Islanders and versus the mainland people. So there's even ways in which the community prefers to be referred to. That's important. So linked to that, you cannot actually tap into Indigenous knowledge if you do not use a participatory approach. And again, without going too much into this, if you do know the participation ladder, it's a very old theory, you'll see that it looks similar. It's also from the university I've referenced in the previous slide. But it goes from the community having nothing. They just get external knowledge, they have no input, versus they might give input, but they don't know what happens with it. They can't fact check anything. Then they might be part of discussion groups, so they're parts of the project, or they participate because there's an exchange of resources, but the moment the material resources stops, the participation stops. So that's not sustainable. And so we're moving further down in the ladder or up. And so they could be part of certain functions and certain stages, but what we obviously want to aim for is the interactive participation, which means that from the planning of the project to completing, they're part of all of it. And so think about how difficult that would be. It's easy to say it, but can you have your community representatives in a faculty meeting talking about the curriculum design of the service learning module, or even in the ethics committee talking about community-based research projects to be approved? So that's the level we're talking about. Then I want to just highlight what these authors say. They were the authors of the principles, one of the sets of principles I use. The key to collaborative action is acting on real and relevant community needs in an inclusive and community-centric way. People are motivated to participate when they feel heard, take action to address injustice, and contribute to health and well-being of their community. So that is key words of how to measure if we're actually doing the sufficiently participative level. Then I'm not going to talk because you're going to hear so much about service learning in this conference. So just to remind you, the difference between just normal service learning, or I don't know is it normal or average or the basic level of service learning. For specifically in South Africa, we moved towards, it was a bit of a movement to say we no longer only do service learning. It needs to be civically engaged, which they call critical service learning. So I don't know if, I'll be curious to know if Hong Kong is doing the same, if that they've also moved. So we just leveling up the level to say it's not just about doing nice things that the community might really need, is in what way are we really being transformative? Are we looking at the social change, the works to distribute power, and becoming really authentic in your relationships? Okay, then what I then, because you'll have the article, I just wanted to highlight for you. Just want to see if the pointer, I didn't test the pointer. No. So this would be the method. All I wanted to say with that is that we find where we are in the project is it's at the bottom of that funnel in the middle. So what it's trying to say is we get new knowledge from pure research, and then we sometimes synthesize those previously gained knowledge, but then what about that? So the next level of this type of model is that you create a tool or product. So we're sitting at that process with what I'm doing, what I'm proposing here is to say, let's go into the action cycle, the beginning of the action cycle, but then you still need to do that process to get the knowledge product properly embedded or implemented. So then about the code of, I just want to quickly show you, these are influences in our research. If we talk about ethics for research, if you just quickly look, the one was already in 1979. You should recognize these if you're doing research. That was specifically a US commission. It wasn't represented from other countries. Then the second World Conference in 2010 had 340 participants only from 51 countries, and they produced the Singapore statement. So it came from a conference. It was an output from a conference that became one of the biggest guidance for our code of ethics. That's what it's based on. We then had the third and the sixth conference that also contributed very significantly, the same conference organizers. But we don't hear so much about that, but you'll see that this comes closer to community engagement. So we're actually looking forward to the adoption of this. So then I asked the question before, if we know that community should be involved, are they on committees where projects are being reviewed, what I've already said. Then if I take all of this knowledge together, what I'm proposing, I'm actually asking the question that what does, let me first just show you the Sun Code of Ethics. So you'll see it's also very specific, so it can't really be adopted to other contexts, but this is self-determination. They took control. They said people would take DNA samples and they don't know what happens with it. They'll use it for other types of projects. So this was actually quite a big process in our country, where, so the Sun they are our most indigenous people in South Africa, and they actually do not allow researchers to come through unless they follow their code of ethics, okay, which is quite powerful. So then, what I want to ask then is, what prevents us? We have so many similar-minded people here. What I understood is we from 20 different countries. Do I remember it correctly? Are we getting to 20? And so what does it mean to, what do we still need to actually get to a proposed code of project? Can this become the Manila or the Philippian statement about community engagement? So that either way there'll be a paper, but what I'm proposing, I'm putting 12 points here. It's a wrap-up of, remember the knowledge that we've synthesized and we're creating a product from it. That is what the focus of my paper would be. But there's 12 points here that's capturing. So those are the first 6. There are the other 6, that is the initial proposal, but I'm wondering, can the conference secretariat help us get into the action cycle, get like-minded people together, and we form a bit of a rights subcommittee, and we actually get this established as a product from this conference. Just throwing it out there. There'll either way be a paper to reference. And then just to show that if we actually do that, then we go into the rest of the adoption. Oh, there's 12 countries. There, I have my answer there. We have 200 delegates from 12 countries. And I don't know if the International the International Symposium on Service Learning is represented here, but they're quite a strong union between South Africa, Stellenbosch University, and the University of Indianapolis. So we also have quite a strong body in South Africa that can join this process. And that is the wrap-up of what I'm proposing, just references.
Well, thank you very much. It's from South Africa. And now we shall have our last presenter. It will be online, and this will be presented by Dr. Maria Josephine Therese Emily Teves and Sarah Grace Candelario.
Good morning, distinguished scholars, humanitarian practitioners, development experts, colleagues, partners in education, and community engagement. I am Maria Josephine Therese Emily G. Teves from UP Manila, and my co-author is Assistant Professor Sarah Grace Candelario from University of the Philippines, Diliman. It is an honor to present our study entitled Assessment of Project Access. Access means assisting most vulnerable communities and schools affected by complex emergencies in assessing quality and timely humanitarian and disaster preparedness services, and ethical community-based education and protection outcomes in complex emergency settings in Maguindanao. So before discussing the findings, I would like to briefly situate the study within the context of Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, or BARM. It has experienced decades of armed conflict, displacement, historical marginalization, and interrupted development, resulting in recurring humanitarian crises and long-term psychosocial impacts on communities and children. So this led us to a central question that guided the study. What does ethical community engagement look like when education itself becomes a survival mechanism during conflict and displacement? Education in emergencies must be understood not only as an educational intervention, but also as a protection, dignity restoration, psychosocial stabilization, peace building, and community resilience building. So the findings of Project Access showed that temporary learning spaces, psychosocial support, and child protection environment created a safer and more supportive environment for children affected by conflict and displacement. Schools became spaces where children regained structure, emotional security, and even continuity. So this study also found improvements not only in literacy and numeracy, but also in social-emotional learning and executive functioning. So this highlights that psychosocial support is central to children's ability to recover and participate in education. At the same time, schools and barangays strengthened disaster risk reduction management systems, community participation, and preparedness mechanisms, contributing to social cohesion and resilience building within communities. However, ethical humanitarian education requires more than service delivery alone. It requires participation, trauma-informed engagement, accountability, localization, child safeguarding, and adaptive humanitarian practice. So the Project Access demonstrates how humanitarian education interventions can move beyond temporary aid delivery and become ethical, community-centered systems in complex emergency settings. So to understand why Project Access matters, we must first understand the humanitarian realities shaping BARM. So it faces overlapping crises, including armed conflict, displacement, flooding, poverty, educational disruption, COVID-19 impacts, climate vulnerability, and intergenerational trauma. For many families, displacement and security have become cyclical, disrupting schooling, livelihood, psychosocial well-being across generations. So BARM is not simply underdeveloped. It is historically shaped by conflict, marginalization, and recurring humanitarian crisis. So that distinction is important because it changes how we frame humanitarian engagement. The challenge is not only how to provide assistance, but how to engage communities without reproducing dependency, extractive practices, or externally imposed interventions. So the methodology of project access was designed not only as a technical process, but also as an ethical practice. Using a mixed methods design, the study combined HALDO, holistic assessment of learning and development outcomes, for literacy, numeracy, social emotional learning, and executive functioning. We also use ILET, improving learning environments together, for protective and supportive learning environments. Structured child surveys, BRRM surveys, disaster risk reduction and management surveys, and anticipatory action assessments, learning facility and wash audits, and post-distribution monitoring. So these tools examine not only academic outcomes, but also psychosocial well-being, safety, preparedness, participation, and community resilience. So triangulation was treated as an ethical practice, no? So by combining child perspectives, teacher inputs, household experiences, community insights, quantitative assessments, and monitoring data. So the study avoided single story narratives and captured more grounded, humanitarian realities. For this, for slide number 8, one of the most important findings of Project Access is that education in humanitarian settings functions far beyond academic instruction. So across BARM, and nearby conflict-affected communities, education operates as a form of protection. The study found that learning kits significantly increase attendance and learner engagement, with 94% of learners receiving that particular material supported continued participation in school despite emergencies. TLS, temporary learning spaces, also played a major role in restoring continuity of learning. For displaced learners and children affected by damaged classrooms or disrupted schooling, TLS provided a stable environment, where learning, routine, and social interaction could continue. Psychosocial support sessions further reassured families, and strengthened children's engagement with schools. Learners reported greater participation, greater perceptions of safety, emotional support, supervision, peer interaction, and belonging within schools implementing integrated interventions. So these findings suggest that schools in humanitarian settings, function not only as educational institutions, but also protective spaces, psychosocial stabilizers, and community trust anchors. So in conflict and disaster settings, schools reduce children's exposure to unsafe environments, social isolation, interrupted supervision, and psychosocial distress. At the same time, psychosocial interventions improve emotional security and even social emotional well-being, while community engagement strengthen trust in both schools and humanitarian systems. So this leads to one central reflection of the study. In humanitarian settings, classrooms become infrastructures of dignity. The study found that many barangays integrated DRRM and anticipatory action into local governance through DRRM plans, contingency protocols, early warning systems, and prepared activities institutionalized within local planning systems. So community involvement also improved responsiveness during emergencies, Schools, local leaders, teachers, caregivers, and community organizations collaborated in preparedness activities, psychosocial support, child protection, and learning continuity efforts. So parents became active participants in sustaining their children's education. So this leads to a central ethical reflection of the study. Ethical engagement is not charity. It is shared governance. Traditional humanitarian approaches often rely on top-down delivery, no, where external actors define priorities and communities participate minimally. So in contrast, project access, demonstrated, no, participatory resilience building, where communities became co-creators of solutions. Local governance systems participated actively, and resilience mechanisms became locally owned and institutionalized. So the findings suggest that interventions became more active when they were locally embedded, and collectively owned. So another critical ethical dimension of project access is the integration of psychosocial support and trauma-informed engagement within education interventions. The HALD assessment demonstrated substantial improvements in social and emotional learning, among participating learners, including gains in emotional regulation, confidence, coping capacities, self-awareness, and interpersonal functioning. So this study also found that referral systems became more functional with approximately 64% of schools establishing referral pathways connected to psychosocial support and child protection services. At the same time, safeguarding, and child protection mechanisms expanded across project sites. So these findings support a broader ethical argument. Humanitarian education must address emotional survival, trauma recovery, and relational security, not just academic performance. So project access demonstrated that children learn better when they experience emotional safety, supportive relationship, psychosocial stability, and trusted protective environments. While project access demonstrated important gains, in learning continuity, psychosocial well-being, the assessment also revealed significant ethical gaps and unresolved challenges. So training coverage remained uneven across schools, while many teachers received training, in psychosocial support, child protection, DRRM, and inclusive education. Coverage varied significantly across project sites, affecting the consistency of support systems. The assessment also identified persistent WASH and infrastructure gaps, including inadequate sanitation, limited water access, overcrowded classrooms, and even incomplete facilities. So these issues directly affect dignity, safety, inclusion, and educational participation. Marginalized learners, particularly children with disabilities, displaced learners, girls, indigenous children, and learners in geographically isolated areas continued to face structural barriers despite intervention gains. And not all schools institutionalize comprehensive systems for psychosocial support, referral pathways, DRRM integration, and inclusive education. So this highlights, a central ethical reality. Progress in humanitarian settings is often uneven. Ethical humanitarian practice therefore requires acknowledging limitations and resisting triumphalist narratives. So project access openly documented implementation gaps, uneven participation, and respondent attrition. So for the key lessons for ethical service learning and community engagement, for lesson number one, community participation is central to sustainability. One of the clearest findings of project access is that interventions become more sustainable when communities actively participated in governance and implementation systems. So ethical community engagement therefore requires shared decision-making, local ownership, and recognition of community agency. Lesson number 2, protection and education cannot be separated. The findings showed that children learned better when they felt emotionally safe, trusted adults in school, experienced psychosocial support, and participated in supported learning environments. For number 3, ethics requires adaptive and localized programming. So the assessment showed that humanitarian realities in BARM remain fluid and constantly changing due to different challenges. So as a result, rigid and externally standardized interventions were often insufficient. So number 4, no, monitoring must include dignity and well-being. No, project access showed that children's experiences of emotional safety, belonging, confidence, psychosocial well-being, and trust were equally important to educational recovery. No? So, last, no, lesson number 5, humanitarian education must co-create resilience. Perhaps the most important lesson of Project Access is that humanitarian education must move beyond short-term service delivery. So, we have to ensure, no, that future projects, no, should demonstrate that interventions should be participatory, trauma-informed, localized, protective, and community-centered. No? So the future projects, no, should help build trust, dignity, psychosocial stability, and collective capacity for recovery amid continuing crisis. Thank you very much, no? And I'm ready, no, to listen, no, to your comments, suggestions, no, or I'm ready, no, to answer your inquiries, no. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much. That is Professor Maria Josephine Therese MLA. Now, at this point, I'd like to call on our panelists to please stay here for the open forum. And now, this will be moderated by one of the leaders, executive members of this organization, and she is from the University of Malaysia. Round of applause, please, to Professor Dr. Vishalache Balakrishnan.
University of Malaya.
Malaya. Sorry, it's University of Malaya. Thank you very much.
Could we have Liwei? Yeah. Okay, a very good morning to all of you. Good afternoon. It's already afternoon. And sorry, organizers, I'm not going to read everything because it will at least take 5 to 10 minutes. We have a script for moderators. But I think for a start, let me just give us a short summary. You have listened to so much, and I'm not sure whether you managed to digest all of it. I took some time due to age and all that. So we had Liwei, who spoke about emotional labor.
Yes.
Okay? And she spoke based on her research and how she came up with the framework. And then we had Dr. Mark, who spoke about the indigenous way of looking at service learning. Yeah, and I think that touches all of us because we all have our own indigenous or local and cultural background. Of course, we had Dr. Rika, who kind of married both. You had the Ubuntu, the African cultural, and then you also had the latest research and how you put it together. And we had Ma Josephine. Hello, Ma, how are you? Who actually brought current situations of what's happening and what is needed for service learning, which I think Dr. Rika brought about critical service learning. I did my postdoc on critical educational psychology, not just simple ones that you go to school and all that. So maybe just to start off, I know some of you have questions with you, but I'm going to start off with a question to cut across everybody. So in the age of uncertainty, what do you see as the most pressing challenge when we have this youth service learning globally? I'm introducing this word globally because 25 years ago, Indonesia had this, when they talk about unity in diversity, we're talking about think global, act local. So that's something very important, which I think Dr. Mark did mention. And because we are international, how should countries respond collectively? So maybe can we start with, maybe Dr. Rika.
I think if I speak just academically, what I keep on hearing coming up in our country is, especially from our Council of Higher Education, is there seem to be, they talk about 3 legs. I heard another speaker talking about the other responsibility of higher education. We've also adopted it, and I've heard it from Hong Kong as well. It's institutionalized, but it doesn't carry the same weight. So you will have promotion criteria for teaching and learning awards, and for research, but not for engagement. So it remains an add-on, which means that we then struggle with what was, Dr. Grace said. We are lagging behind our research. There's a gap between the practice. So the intent is there. I think everyone wants to do it. It makes sense to people, especially humanities, and it cuts across all the other disciplines of us as well. So everyone's getting on board with this, but the same application of status and promotion and funding and everything else that supports the other 2 legs is falling behind with the 3rd leg.
Thank you. Dr. Mark?
My perspective regarding that is, we have the term, if there is globalization, localization, we have glocalization. And it's very important that when we engage with learning, especially in the context of service learning, or what I'm proposing as Dagyaw Dunong, it is acknowledging where you're coming from, but also being cognizant of the important contribution of what other discourses outside of your country. So I'm not advocating for a purist approach in terms of, hey, when we talk about Dagyaw Dunong, everything must only come from us. Then if that happens, then the term becomes xenophobic, and we don't want that. And also, when students engage, it's also very important for them to see the perspective outside of their own borders. Right now, the challenge in the Philippines is, I've always been asked, in other countries, they bring their students outside, to do service learning. Here in the Philippines, how come that is not the case? Well, there are a lot of answers to that. But basically, the first one is, the problem is here. The context is here. That's why it's very important to address them now. But I also do acknowledge that it would be great for fellow Filipinos, our students, to learn about other cultures in Indonesia, in Thailand, Vietnam, and other Southeast Asian countries, and do the kind of Dagyaw Dunong or service learning work there. And I believe that would also be enriching. So it works both ways. It's very important to work with your own culture and localities, but at the same time, also be welcoming on what others have to offer.
Yeah, that reminds me of charity starts at home, right? We start from home rather than going everywhere and not realizing our own children, our own community needs help. Yes, Laiwei.
Okay, I will talk about it. Okay, I will talk about it from the practical perspective, because as Grace just mentioned, in the service learning, the most important stakeholder is the educators, right? The teacher, that is us. But in the practical level, as in mainland China or in my college setting, I think conducting service learning course require us or require the teachers to spend more time, and we need to have more resources. And but in reality, I think the management or the HR, they do not recognize that, so they count our workload as the timetable, okay, the teaching timetable. So they think, oh, okay, the teachers who conducting the social learning courses are not, your workload is not enough. So they, recently, they like to raise our, to increase our classes from 6 to 8 classes. So I think this is the real difficulties that we are facing now. So if we have 8 classes in, 30 students to 50 students a class, it's kind of difficult or impossible to bring students to the real side or, to conduct some practical service to conducting the service learning. I think that's my point from the practical difficulties.
Okay, thank you for that. So we can see philosophical, practical, idealism, and yes, Ma Josephine, do you have some suggestions?
Yes, I think the most pressing challenge facing service learning globally today is how to remain ethical, relevant, and sustainable in the age of uncertainty. So now we are witnessing what many scholars call holy crisis, the convergence of climate change, poverty, public health emergencies. So these challenges are interconnected and increasingly affect communities simultaneously. In UP Manila, University of the Philippines, Manila, we see this reality firsthand, through community immersion and service learning programs. So our students work with poor communities, indigenous peoples, local governments, health programs, and civil society organizations. So one lesson we continually learn is that communities are not facing a single problem. Issues of health are connected to livelihoods. Education is connected to displacement, and environmental concerns are connected to governance and social justice. So the challenge for service learning is that traditional models often position universities as providers of knowledge, and communities as recipients of assistance. In an era of uncertainty, that model is no longer sufficient. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ma Josephine. Okay, now I'm going to go to you all. I started a question rolling here. Do any of you have a very serious question, something that is like so pressing to you? Can I have a show of hands? Anybody? Or is your tummy rumbling now? Yes, please. Please introduce yourself, your name, where you're from, and your question.
Hello, I'm Miguel Catalig. I'm from UP Manila. So my question is for Lai Wei Lausche. So you mentioned about emotional investment. When do you notice that students become too emotionally invested? And how do you suggest to lower the emotional investment so that learning is maximized? So when do you notice, what are some traits when you see that the students are becoming too burned out?
Okay, thank you for your question. Okay, thank you for your question. Actually, the project is on semester rotation. So, but the project we have run it for several years. At least 3 years, okay? So every semester we have different students to participate in this project to cooperate with the social workers to finish the home visit. Every semester we collect students' journals from the processing period and after all the home visits, and also we will have some focus groups after their visits. Then I get to know some feedbacks, and I collect some students' feedback from these materials. Yeah. Then I realized that I think there is some problem in it. So we try to figure it out through this research. Yeah, we want to try something to address this problem. But I don't know whether it works, okay? So it's a theoretical building in this stage. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's 3 years, and I think that is one of the reasons why service learning is never conducted in solo. It's always group. Okay, if it's individual, then it's like volunteer work. You just go and do something. But it's always group, because there are times where I understand as a student or as a lecturer, there are ups and downs, and some people feel so burnt out. Some are just piggy banking on the service learning. So actually, it's a very good research, and in the long term, you could come up with more ideas. Okay, that's a very good question. Any other burning questions? Because this is actually going to bring you throughout the next 2 days. They've come up with different framework. Dr. Mark has that very traditional local framework. Any comments, any ideas, any questions? Yes.
Good morning. I'm Brian Melendres from the University of the Philippines. This question is for Dr. Teves, who's I'm from the Philippines. We're from the University of the Philippines. One of our problem in service learning and even in community engagement is red tagging. Can you imagine? I'm doing a pottery research in Bohol. I was asked by the village to submit a police clearance just to prove that I am not a militant. So I don't know, experience it, because it's Maguindanao. So the threat is much, much higher compared to, the beautiful island of Bohol. So any insights on the, Dr. Teves? Thank you.
Dr. Mark or Josephine?
Actually, yes, thank you for raising that particular issue, no? In the Philippine context, concerns related to red tagging have become a significant challenge for community engagement, service learning, and even academic research, particularly when working with marginalized communities, IPs, conflict-affected population, or even organizations engaged in advocacy and social development. From my experience at the University of the Philippines, Manila, we have become increasingly conscious that ethical community engagement requires not only protecting participants, but also protecting students, faculty, community partners, and local stakeholders. And one important lesson we have learned is that community engagement should never be approached as simply entering a community and implementing activities. For me, or for the Development Studies program in UP Manila, that requires careful relationship building, transparency, institutional coordination, and respect for local contexts. So this can be understood through the principle of do no harm. Which emphasizes that even well-intentioned interventions may unintentionally expose communities or participants to risks if context is not carefully considered. So before any community immersion or engagement, we should place a strong emphasis on informed consent with local stakeholders, risk and context assessments, transparency regarding objectives and activities, institutional approvals and documentations, safeguarding protocols, and continuous dialogue with partners. And lastly, at the same time, I think the challenge reminds us that trust is a fundamental ethical component of service learning. Communities must feel safe engaging with us, with universities, and universities must ensure that engagement does not place communities at additional risk. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think that's really very important for us educators and also students. Is there any question or can I bring up something for the panel? Okay. So based on our first keynote, Dr. Grace, we know that the outcome of service learning is often difficult to measure, right? So could each of you share an empirical study or a practical project conducted by you or your team, And how did you design the evaluation framework? What evidence convinced you that the education that we are spreading now has fostered these young people's value growth and development? Can anybody start? Maybe Dr. Mark? Yeah.
Yeah, I do believe that evaluation is very important whenever we do service learning. One recent publication released in 2023 is that we did a community impact study of our sites, our partners within the Philippines, and what did our community partners perceive and felt about those engagements. And it's very important to get the perspective of our partners, not just from our students, because it validates whether are we doing harm with communities, especially the importance of safeguarding and emphasizing that whatever they will say will not endanger any partnership with the university. So it's very important that it becomes a safe space for our partners to really voice out what they see, because sometimes they're hesitant to talk about negative aspects, because there is a fear that if I say something that is not good, maybe students will not come back again. There are those discussions. It's very important for the community to feel safe and to be honest, so that you could get both the negative and the positive. And I've always advocated that part of our work is not only publishing for fellow academics, but also publishing for the greater readership, whether in the Philippines or outside. So aside from academic journals, it will also be good to publish in, or have your work published in magazines, in op-eds, so that people would understand better what we are doing in terms of service learning and community engagement. So that's my take on it. It's part of our ethical responsibility to let people know what we are doing and why, and what is the evidence that it is creating change in people's lives.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mark. Before the next person says, this is also where ethics comes in. If you see in Europe and all, compared to Asia, we put the picture of the child, the picture of people. So I think that is also the part that Dr. Dirace didn't touch, but it's very, very important. So I think when you mention about having it publicized, so that needs to be taken care of. Vulnerable people, vulnerable single mothers or teenage pregnancy, because our students like to go and help out, but we've got to be careful. So thank you for that, Dr. Rika.
Yeah, I can link to just your point before I get to my answer, is that we have quite strict legislation through our Childcare Act and personal sharing of information. So we have 2 acts that actually prevents us. So you need to make sure in your indemnity process that students know they're not allowed to take these photos or get permission. So from our side, at our institution, approaches this institutionally through our strategy is pretty much focused on, there's certain things you can count. So you can say there's so many service learning modules, there's so many students involved, so many staff involved, but you can't count impact. So we make a differentiation between reach and impact. So we measure both. So our metrics is not only knowing how much, but to what is the change over time. And one of the approaches that works nicely with that to make sure that community voice comes in is if you look at the results chain that says you have input, output, outcome, and impact. So one of the things that we're bringing in is that it's not just output in terms of there's a module or there's a paper or all that. The output needs to speak to what was adopted or used by the community. So just putting in that little one line puts in the pressure for where do you get it back, and then other things that we're trying to do, but it's always issues with online spaces. If you have a platform for staff, it's not necessarily accessible externally, but how do you create a space where staff capture, but there's a feedback loop that gets created that only the external people need to do. And when you pull your data, you know that that data is from the external people. But of course, IP and data management and all that is a question. And then the final other thing is that it's quite important, because our Council of Higher Education have higher education practice standards for engaged institutions. We, apart from needing to speak to that during our accreditation visits, we need to evidence things. So what we would say is, as nice as it is that you have projects and we can probably list them, if you can't evidence the partnership, and you can do it as basic as a memorandum of understanding, if no place the community said, this is my expectation, this is my responsibility. So if you don't have that shared, so we're expecting, although some of our academics do wonderful things, if they can't evidence that, then we can ask a question to say, but how much what is measurable in terms of that partnership?
Thank you, Dr. Rika. And we have to wrap up. Maybe your last answer, or Ma, just 1 minute each of you.
Okay, then I speak in short, briefly. Of course, we have a mechanism to collecting the information or materials from students, student side. We also have some interviews, deep interviews, or short talks with our organization, cooperate organizations, and also our service recipients. So to collect, to see whether the project's doing harm to them, or what's their feeling, and to evaluate the project and the learning outcome. Yeah.
Thank you. And one last word from Ma Josephine.
Okay, probably I would just like to share, the project that I had, with the humanity and inclusion. This project is about evaluating the experience of persons with disabilities during COVID-19 pandemic. We focus on experiences of PWDs and how public health measures affected their access to healthcare and livelihood. So for that, we employed methodological triangulation, through surveys, key informant interviews, consultations with disability organizations, and we also ensured that we secure formal ethical clearance prior to data collection. So for this, ultimately this project, this ethical evaluation is not only about obtaining consent form or ethical clearance. It is also about ensuring that the evaluation process itself respects dignity, promotes inclusion, amplifies marginalized voices, and contributes to positive social change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone for listening attentively. This is just the start of our 2 days, and as we are reflecting, as I'm reflecting based on the answers and the keynote, we should also remember this aspect of mutual respect, of the value diversity of different cultural traditions, and we need to strike a balance between consensus and diversity. So with that, thank you everyone.
Once again, a round of applause please for our panel plenary speakers. We have Dr. Mark Anthony Abiner, we have Dr. Rika Swanzen, Dr. Maria Josephine Therese Emily Teves, and of course, Dr. Lei Wei, and our moderator from University of Malaya, Professor Dr. Vishalache Balakrishnan. A round of applause, please. Now, it's 2 hours and we will be eating again. Okay, so the place you had your refreshment earlier will be the same place you'll be having your lunch for today and tomorrow. Secondly, while we will be enjoying our food, we will be serenaded by our community partner. They're the No School for Crippled Children. We have this rondalia and some. And for the food, we're also serving halal and vegetarian food. Please ask our staff which one is halal and vegetarian. And finally, this venue is called the School of Economics. We shall be having oral parallel sessions, workshops here. But at 6:15 p.m., we'll be having our conference dinner and socials at GT Toyota Asian Center, which is just next to this building, and our volunteers will be assisting you as well. So once again, thank you very much, and a big hand please to our speakers. Now, we have extended a little bit, so our program can start at 1:40 p.m. in our parallel sessions. Again, we will be starting at 1:40 p.m. Please proceed to your rooms during that session. Thank you very much and enjoy your lunch.